E4 is one of my favorite openings to play against, and the reason is simple. There are so many amazing options for how you can absolutely destroy this opening. My name is Anthony Arena. I am a 2000 rated chess expert from Long Island, New York. Today I'm going to show you the three best responses to E4. We're going to use real life examples from some of the best chess players of all time. Starting off with Sergei Tavatsky, and in this situation, he is going to choose to play D5, the Scandinavian defense. It is simple. We are looking to disrupt our opponent's center and simply say, if you're going to take us, we're going to take back, and we have no problem. Now, your opponent will take the pawn because it's the most accurate response. And here you're going to have a variety of options. The main two are knight to f6, as well as just queen takes d5. Queen to f6 is considered the best option, the most accurate, because it's impossible to defend the pawn without giving up initiative. But queen to takes on d5 is completely fine as well. In this situation, you're always going to see knight to c3 because it gives you an extra tempo. He's attacking your queen and developing the knight. And you're going to see one of three options. Queen to d8, which looks kind of weird because you're just taking your queen and putting it back into the starting square. But this is actually not too bad, and you'll just develop normally. You can also see queen over here to a5. Not a bad move either. However, what Sergei Tavatsky does, considered to be the best Scandinavian player of all time, queen d6. This is the most rare opening, but it is very playable. In this situation, after the pawn pushes, we're just going to develop normally. C6 is a great move. The whole point is to limit the light square's mobility. You'll eventually put the clamps on with E6 as well, and the light square bishop won't have anywhere to go. Ideally, you trade off your light square bishop first in order to really actualize that advantage. So knight over to e5, you might see something like knight to c4, trying to attack the queen and dislodge it. A big goal of your opponent in the Scandinavian is going to be to move your queen around and steal tempo. So understanding that, he plays knight to d7 because after knight goes back to c4, he's just going to move back to c7 and look to trade off these knights as well. The queen goes out to f3 and knight to b6 is played. So bishop develops, queen moves over, and he's looking to just take space on the king side. So takes, and queen takes on d4. Sergei has actually managed to take a one pawn advantage here, and you have to actually protect this bishop first. So bishop moves back, and then e6. He wasn't able to trade off the light square bishop, but this bishop here is going to be very useless as well. In this situation, the rook is going to come over to d1. Like I said, chasing the queen around and developing his pieces to better squares, but he knows how to maneuver this queen, and b6 is a great option here. It's out of harm's way. Maybe bishop to e3 is played, but he would have escape squares, or even bishop to c5 now I think about it. Either way, our opponent did castle, and the bishop develops to e7. Knights trade off the board and castling. And bishop e5 immediately threatens this g7 square. You have to watch out for checkmate. However, we get the rook out to d8. Seems like a dubious move, but queen would just take back on d8. The big challenge here, and one thing I don't like about how he's played this game, is that the light squared bishop is blocking off the two rooks. You'd really like them to be connected. So you'll see how he can actually maneuver and get out of this predicament. But for now, he doesn't trade. He simply just moves his rook to d7. This is a quick maiden one, but a very elegant and quiet move. Bishop f8. And here, there's actually no way to really get rid of this annoying defender. So this attack becomes very useless very quickly. The queen is covering these dark square diagonals, meaning that you'll be able to slip that second rook to d8 as well. So he's preparing a pawn push here, and we're just going to play queen d5. e4 is obviously possible, but it would be at the expense of your bishop. So first, defending the bishop. Now you're going to get that b4 maneuver. And here it is. So the queen moves back and simply just h4. He's looking to create this pawn storm on the king side and attack using his very strong bishops and queen, maybe even lifting the rook over to g3 as well. But the game continues. h5, taking crucial space back. The rook takes, bishop takes. And actually, a big accomplishment here, he can finally go rook to d8, but be very careful. Rook to d8 falls to a skewer tactic. So not so fast, just bishop back to e8. super quiet, defends the f7 square. This bishop here is defending g7. And even though these pieces look really bad, this defense is very solid. And we're also up a pawn still. We do get a repetition of moves here of the bishop to f6. And really, white has no reason not to take a draw here, being that he's down a full point of material. And I do believe that it is up to Sergey in order to avoid the draw since he is winning. Queen to d8, and then bishop to h6. Very classy. He's not going to just keep moving the queen back and forth. He's instead going to say, well, take my queen, I'll take your queen, and I will get my rook to d8 eventually, and I'm going to win by a pawn. No big deal. So the queen was out of the way. Queen d2. The bishop goes back to b3 in order to defend that square. And now we're going to try to trade down. We're up a pawn, so why not? But at the end of the day, just because we're up a pawn doesn't mean that's going to be how the game continues. See, we push c5, but I do think in this position, Sergey may have missed a really nice tactic. Rook e6. This is a very strong opponent, and he finds a really good move here. It may look like he's just losing a rook, but after pawn takes back, bishop takes, a delicious fork of the king on g8 and the rook on c8, and you can't take the bishop back. So in this situation, he just wins a pawn for free, and we go for check, bishop check, and the game has changed a little bit. Our opponent now has a material advantage. For the meantime, I mean, the pawn can take back, queen takes, it's interesting, but we actually have a really nice initiative here. You see, we play bishop to c6. You don't have to defend this bishop. If pawn takes bishop, we have queen check, and yes, the king does have g3, but this will quickly be checkmate, game over. So you actually can't take the bishop. You have to instead try to defend. Sergey finds queen to d2, once again saying, okay, if you take, I take, and it's once again checkmate. So you have to be careful of these one-hitter checkmate ideas. The queen goes to defend, and then bishop to e3. This is the defining move of the game, and this is really what wins it, because there is no way to win this bishop, to really protect this position without losing material. Bishop to g5, bishop takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes. And you see here that the position is even, but this pawn on the a file is going to be way too strong. If you watch a little bit longer, you see how these pawns just go ahead and promote. He's going to go for one more attack, with the idea basically being if you take this bishop, the queen comes into h5, it's going to win a lot of material, and you're going to try to promote this g-pawn, right? But Sergey is not afraid of this because after a couple more moves, just shuffling around, trying to create an attack on g6, you're going to find that this pawn is lost. The king and queen are defending it, but here just queen takes. And his opponent actually resigns here because simply after queen takes, right, bishop takes, king takes, pawn takes on g4, and these two passers, neither one of them are stoppable, and the f-pawn just isn't fast enough. And that's just game over. In the next game, we have one by Joseph Blackburn, Grandmaster and chess legend. Instead of disrupting the center with d5, we're going to see e5 here. And the whole idea is simple. You're just trying to say, okay, if you control the center, I control the center as well. So development continues. The knights come out, attacking and defending e5. And we do see one of the biggest disadvantages of e5, which is that our opponent can play pretty much any opening they want here. You don't really have the choice of saying, I'm going to play the Scandinavian, I'm going to play the Sicilian. It's your opponent's choice. Does he want to play the Roy Lopez, bishop b5? Does he want to play the Italian, bishop c4, or maybe the Ponzianzi c3, or even d4 the Scotch? There's so many different openings that your opponent can choose here, but the bright side is you will be able to play bishop c5, knight f6, and you'll be in actually a very strong position with a nice attack no matter what. In this situation, we have the Italian game, bishop c4. We develop that bishop first. In true to form, after pushing here on c3, turning it into more of a Guccio piano type game, we just play knight f6. And we're going to have a really nice attack here on f2. Our opponent has the exact same threat here on f7. So it's going to make sense for both sides to castle quickly. However, our opponent pushes the center first. This is pretty much theory, basic stuff. In the center, we have takes, and check. The idea is now to trade off the bishop because it's a liability in the center of the board. And after the knight takes back, now it's safe to castle after knight takes, right? And we are up a pawn here, so far so good. This is slightly winning, but our opponent has a really nice attack on this light square diagonal. It's a battering ram. If bishop takes on f7, the game is pretty much lost, so you just have to castle yourself. Now, my advice here would be simple. Yes, for now, f7 is protected, but you have to be wary when there's so much pressure on this square. At certain points, he might be able to add a third attacker and create problems for you. So understanding that this threat is so heavy, knight to h5, he's going to try to put his queen on g5, knight on f4, and just attack g2 and try to get that checkmate. So pushing e5 with the idea of pawn takes, and then maybe just getting the rook into the action as well. Queen g5, pawn is going to take, of course. And after knight to f4, we have an actually really nice move. Like I said, you can't forget about this diagonal here, bishop f7. And this looks perplexing at first. Why on earth are you taking with the bishop? And the idea is actually quite simple. You play rook f7, then rook e8. Queen is pinning the rook. The rook can't come back to f8. This is actually a back rank checkmate. This is a very dangerous tactic that you have to watch out for. So anytime your opponent sacrifices material, instead of assuming he's made a mistake, think to yourself, what is the idea? Why did he do this? And once you understand that, king just moves over to h8. And once again, made in one threat, the bishop is hanging. And you'll see how Joseph Blackburn utilizes this hanging bishop and the hanging mate to win the game. So g3 and pawn takes here. This pawn can't take back. And also, knight to h3 is now playable. The bishop would be defending here. So after knight to c3, trying to develop the knight into the game, maybe kick the queen away. We have knight check, king moves over, and queen f6, attacking the bishop. This is a double attack, of course. If you don't defend the bishop and let's say rook takes, even if the rook comes back to e8, the rook isn't pinned to the king. King's over here on h8. So rook down to f8. And after a series of trades, you just be up a piece. And of course, the bishop's defending the knight as well. So in this situation, he defends the bishop. And it's a good move too, because he's defending the light squared diagonal. And really, you don't see how even after queen to f2, the king just moves back to h1. Because the light squared diagonal is defended, there's nothing obvious on the board that suggests mates. However, that is the brilliancy of Joseph Blackburn, because in this situation, he plays queen g1, queen g1. What is this? It's not smothered mate. The pawn isn't on g2, it's on g3. Well, okay, the knight's defending the queen, king can't take back, rook has to take back, but it's not smothered mate, because after knight to f2, our opponent's made a mistake, right? Because king to g2, and he's completely fine. But there's one more move here, and it ties the whole position together. Bishop h3, and it doesn't look like it, but this is checkmate, okay? The rook is defending f3. The bishop is checking on g2, defending f1, and the knight is covering h1. And the most beautiful part about this entire position is all these pieces are protecting each other. Joseph Blackburn has smothered the king. This is game over. While that game might seem impossible to live up to and to beat, this game is even better. We have Beth Harmon, Queen's Gambit, versus the world champion from Russia, and her top option, the Sicilian Defense c5. Not disrupting the center, not trying to take the center, but instead playing a less obvious move, but it has a point. You are controlling d4, so the d4 push doesn't really work. Like say pawn takes, queen to d4, and then knight to c6, and it doesn't really work. You're preventing that d4 push. So you put the knight on f3, just basically saying, okay, now I can push. The knight defends on c6, and pawn pushes down. And the idea here is simple. You don't have to take back right away. You actually can hold this pressure here on d4 and just continue with your development. If your opponent does take the knight here, b takes c, and eventually you're going to push d5, and you will actually end up controlling the center and having a massive advantage. So instead, simply just knight to c3, and that's okay too. We just continue to develop our pieces both ways. And really, the point is simple. You're going to castle. Yes, this pawn storm does look scary, but you know he's going to go queenside. So eventually, you're going to push for your own attack as well. And a6 is very quiet, but it actually does four things. So for starters, the bishop can't go to b5, the knight can't go to b5, the c pawn can't go to b5, and eventually you're going to push b5 yourself, and you're going to attack because that is where your opponent is obviously going to castle at this point. So Harmon feels as though it's time to consolidate a little bit, just push the center, attack the position, and try to just really go after the king. The bishop on b7, very timely idea, trying to eye down the rook after some trades maybe. And rook to c8, not a bad idea at all, just looking to target c7. G5, common response. The knight's just going to move over to d7. This is scary, but Beth Harmon knows that she has an attack of her own. And here, looks like she's hanging b4. But if bishop takes, knight, pawn takes, bishop defends. And because she's playing black and her opponent is the world champion, he's not necessarily looking for a drawing endgame. So instead, just playing rook to g3, not really going for these ideas. Knight to c4 attacks the queen. And here, I actually think that queen takes on b4 is the best move. But with ideas of discovered attack, rook b8, lining the queen, and king up, our opponent was scared off of the best move. I do think this is a bluff, and I believe queen b4 would have been a slight advantage for white. But you can't blame your opponent who's playing Beth Harmon for going queen c1. However, I do believe that this is the losing move, and this is where Beth Harmon really takes over. First, e5, tempo on the bishop, followed by a5, looking to continue to just gingerly and slowly, but precisely, push the pawns on the queen side. The bishop's going to come to g2, but bishop a6, just getting your pieces in better positions, but also you're threatening the knight on e2. So the rook defends, and a4. This is masterful. What Beth Harmon is doing is she's slowly getting her pieces into better positions, but she's also walking the pawns closer and closer to the king, getting ready for that final attack. The bishop attacks the rook, rook c6. She has an idea, and it pertains to controlling the c file because it is the open file. Maybe people would consider going rook b8, but because this file is already open and it's also adding a little extra defense to d6, this seems like a great move. Queen d1, but here d5. D5 doesn't seem like a great move because both the queen and the pawn can take. But actually, if queen takes, right? So let's say queen takes here, rook d6, and the queen's trapped. Even if queen c6, right? Rook check, and the bishop is discovering the queen. And then also, I mean, queen would take the rook first, knight would defend. It's not mate, but you lose material there. You lose a full queen. So the point is, you can't take with the queen. You have to take with the pawn, but rook d6 anyway. And this position is impossible to defend on d5. So just going ahead and trying to rip open the position here. But I think it's kind of over already after rook to d5. The queen is under attack. There's nowhere great for the queen to go. Like really, the only option is queen c1. So you have to put the rook in front. And really, the most brilliant move in this entire game, and maybe this entire video, knight a3, because the king is now in check. The rook is triple attacked, right? Because not only the queen and the rook, but don't forget about that bishop that she moved to a6. It is in perfect position, and she had planned this 10 moves in advance, saying that if that rook jumps in front, my bishop on h6 will take that rook and end the game. So pawn takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes, and we have a fork on the queen and the bishop. And even if there wasn't a fork, you would have something like queen to d5, and really this attack is just going to be too devastating. So at this point, her opponent stands up, claps, gives her applause. She is the world champion, and rightfully so. This game was absolutely insane. But you don't need to be a grandmaster in order to play beautiful chess. For example, understanding that e4 is an idea to control the center and develop your bishop and queen rapidly. You can defend this by taking the center yourself, by disrupting a center, or by taking your control of the d4 square. Depending on which opening you play, you now have the architecture behind some really unique attacks that you can play in all three positions. I'm attaching the exact same resource, but for d4, so you can master the two most popular openings in all of chess, and that's right here. Stay classy, my friends. Until next time.